Hi there, I hope you enjoyed the last video with the 400mm. If the venues in this video looks familiar, don't you switch off. I'll explain later, but today I'm testing two completely different lenses. And to be honest, I just don't understand why one of those lenses is even part of the Z lens range. It is in fact this, the Z70 to 180, f2.8. Why Nikon? We already have an excellent 70 to 200 and that's an f2.8 too. So what can be the difference? Well, there are a few. Money. The 70 to 180 is £1,000 cheaper at 1,300, with the 70 to 200 retailing for about 2,300. Size wise, the 180 is just 17 centimetres and the 200 is nearer 24 centimetres, but that's when it's wound in, of course. Weight, the 70 to 180 is 795 grams, whereas the 70 to 200 is a lumpy 1440 grams. And that's like strapping my travel mug to this and then filling it with tea. So the lenses are different, but I'm still confused by the zoom range difference. And while I understand that there must be a place for the 70 to 180 range, partly because historically they've existed, and partly because Tamron are doing one for Sony at the moment, but don't forget they haven't produced a current 70 to 200 at the same time for it to compete with. They do sell 70 to 200s for the Canon EF and Nikon F range, but that's a completely different market. So the more I think about it, the more I find Nikon's decision to produce two virtually identical lenses within 3 years of each other confusing, to say the least. Especially as the 70 to 200 isn't exactly past its sell-by date, and I'd have thought can be found in most camera bags already. There's only one way to get to the bottom of this, and that's to test both of these lenses back to back. So with that in mind, I'm going to point them at some birds. Yes, I know the 70 to 200 isn't exactly the first lens anybody would normally pick up for bird photography, and yes, I also know there are no spectacular shots here, but the quality does look really good. Well, I know how excellent the 70 to 200 is already, but the 70 to 180 does seem to match it. I made sure that the 70 to 200 lens was zoomed to 180 and the camera settings stayed the same for the two lenses. So there was absolutely no advantage gained by either. Here's a side-by-side comparison of both of them. They both look sharp, but the 200 looks a little brighter, don't you think? And if we crop in and bear in mind that these are absolutely massive crops, way more than we'd ever do in real life, the 70 to 200 looks a little sharper. Moving on to the next set, at full size they're similar once again. I'm not sure if the 70 to 80 is duller or the 70 to 200 just looks more vibrant. But there is a difference there. Close crop, and again the 200 is a little sharper, but would we really notice if we hadn't cropped in so much? These images were randomly selected, by the way. I'm not presenting the worst ones to you guys, or the best ones at that either. At normal crop, would we have really noticed the difference? Can I really say that this is much sharper than this? So in the real world, where we aren't pixel peeping, both lenses are fairly close in performance then. So is there anything else different between them? One of the biggest differences between these two lenses is their minimum focusing distance. The 70 to 200 gives you about 48 centimetres or 19 inches from the image sensor. That's at 70mm, and 95 centimetres or nearly 38 inches when you zoom out to 180. Whereas the 70 to 180 lets you get an awful lot closer. 70 centimetres or just short of 11 inches, that's at 70mm, and 88 centimetres or about 34 inches at the full 180mm. You may have noticed already that the 180 is an external extending zoom and the 200 is non-extending. There's an argument that the former isn't as weather or dust proof, but I have to say that's never really caused me a problem. Is it you? And though I do admit they may look a little vulnerable stuck out like that, as if a simple knock would break it, that doesn't really bother me as I'm not normally that close to the action. In fact, if something's that close, I'm about to become the scene of an unfortunate accident. Now, because these lenses for me are sports lenses, and they're close sports lenses, you don't get much closer than at motocross, so I thought I'd give that a go. For the majority of these pictures, the camera settings were mirrored, so you should get a pretty accurate comparison. The first couple were taking a shutter speed of about 2000, which was way too high for this subject. To show movement, I needed the wheels to blur at the very least. See, these are better at 400, and although I shot the majority using 500 to 640, the more I shot with these lenses throughout the day, the more confident I got in the lower speeds. In fact, as you'll see in a minute, I got right down to 250 for the last 6 images, and that made the background blur too. Apart from these 2 shots, 180mm was easily good enough for this close action, and these ones were taken at the full 70mm, and I can't see any fall off in quality or distortion at the edge of either lens. Although I was back at higher shutter speed for these 2, I still got a bit of movement blur, probably because they were so close. But I'm still at 70mm here, so you can imagine how close they actually were. Overall, I found the images from the 200 to be slightly more defined. I haven't enhanced the shot on the right. It's received precisely the same minimal editing as the 180. Here are the 250 shutter speed images. As I said in my last video, the Z9 made the taking of this shot relatively easy. I had more soft images with the 180 than the 200mm as a matter of interest at this lower speed, but they were both pretty impressive. The bikes flying past meant I had to zoom in and out pretty rapidly to keep the bikes and the riders in frame. The distance I need to turn the zoom ring from the 70 to 180 is a lot less with the 180 than the 70 to 200, and that's not just because it's got 20mm less distance to travel. You see, one movement with the 200 takes me from 70 to about 135, but I need a second go to reach 200, but it's fingertips smooth and light, you see. On the other hand, the 180 can be turned in one go, which is handy, but it's also a bit lighter. I can do it using that one finger technique, but it is hard work. Now, the first thing I noticed with the 70 to 180 is that there are none of the usual buttons that we're familiar with. No function switches, no auto manual AF options, and no focus limit switch. To be quite honest, I didn't really miss any of them. Well, the function switches maybe, and perhaps the limit switch, but that's not a crucial tool when a lens focuses as quickly as this one does. Check it out. In this test, I'll focus on 3 objects at different distances. Number 1, this bush. Number 2, the apple tree. And finally, the tree in the distance. As in the previous video, I'm not pressing the shutter as soon as I see the object. I'm delaying it so that it distinguishes between the movement of the camera and the actual focus. Both lenses had the same exposure settings and the limit switches were set to infinity. The 70 to 200 lens was once again zoomed to 180, so all was equal. And once again I was listening to the late great Hank Williams to get that timing the best that I could. Not that it always worked, but hopefully you get the idea. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm finding them both pretty rapid, both from close to far and vice versa. I'd be really interested to hear what you think in the comments below. In the meantime, let me put forward a little thought. Imagine you're photographing your favourite sports person who's about to perform a manoeuvre, maybe for the last time, or a child kicking their first ball, or a dog's touching noses. Then imagine what happens when you're not quite ready with the camera. You lift it up to your eye and start shooting. Now that's why fast autofocus is absolutely crucial. It could be the deciding factor in whether you capture the memory or flunk it forever. We can adjust exposure, crop and edit colours, but if the photo is out of focus, there's little we can do. Just a thought. Now you may not get the other switches with an 180, but you do get a locking switch that prevents the lens from creeping. But strangely it only locks it at 70mm, so I guess they had travelling in mind when it was discussed at the planning stage. It's completely unnecessary anyway, because it's absolutely zero creep with this lens. On my Z9, the heavier 70-200 seems more balanced and comfortable. It actually causes the camera to sit heavier in the hand, and that makes it very stable. The 70-180 being somewhat, let's call it short and stubby, feels slightly less accurate to aim and point. Now that could be because I'm more familiar with the larger lens, but I think it has more to do with the weight. After all, the 24-70 is a shorter lens, and I'm familiar with that, and I find it perfectly comfortable. I don't know. Anyway, pop the 180 on a smaller camera like the ZFC, and it feels like a big lens, and it's perfectly balanced. And do you know what? I think that's what Nikon had in mind for this lens. The Nikon Z70-180 is a more affordable, lower spec alternative to the Z70-200. It's not an S-line or a Pro lens, so it's not quite as well built or weather sealed, but it is a quality and enthusiastic little model aimed at the enthusiast market. And it really performs, and for £1,300 it's a complete steal. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and if you like this video, you know what to do, you like it. And if you really like it, hit that subscribe button. You've only got to move the mouse slightly and click. Anyway, see you soon.